Welcome back everybody. In this video I'm going to show you how to create this psychedelic animation. Unlike the other tutorials, this one is going to be a little bit longer, but it's packed with a lot of cool stuff. So grab yourself a cup of coffee and let's get started. So first of all, let's create a new composition. And for the width and height, I'm going to choose 1080, 24 frames per second, and also 10 seconds for duration. Press OK. Now let's create a new background. So I'm going to click on the new adjustment layer, rename it BG, and I'm going to search here for an effect called for color gradient. Double click on it, and for the first color, I'm going to choose a red one. For the second color, I'm going to choose a light pink. For the third one, I'm going to choose something like a blue, more of a teal. Alright, and for the last color, I'm going to choose a light yellow. Alright, now make sure you uncheck this button here. And now we have a nice background composed of 4 colors. But I want to take these points and move them apart a little bit, something like this. And let's increase the blend to about 400, something like this. Alright, now I want to create more contrast. So I'm going to select a curves effect, double click on it. And I'm going to move the highlights a little bit lower, actually upper, and the shadows a little bit lower. And now we have a more contrasted background. You can see the difference with or without. Maybe now we can increase the blend a little bit more, something like a 600. Yeah, that seems pretty nice. Maybe we can take the red and move it a little bit further, something like this. Let's toggle this down. Now what you want is to animate the background a little bit. So I'm going to search for a color offset effect, double click on it, and then make sure you put a keyframe on the red face, green face, and the blue face. Press U to reveal all the keyframes. And now let's go about 30 frames forward. So 10, 20, 30. And let's create another set of keyframes. And let's change the red phase, also the green one, and also the blue phase, something like this. Now let's go 10, 20, 30, 40 frames, and let's change again the red phase, the green one, and the blue phase, something like this. Now let's take all of these colors, press Alt on the stopwatch, and let's write here time. Actually not time, we want to loop this effect, so I'm going to write loop out and ping pong. Now let's copy this effect and let's apply this effect to the other color phases, something like this. Select all the keyframes, press F9 for an easy animation, and let's see how it looks. Yeah, it looks pretty good, but if you look closer, you can see there is a glowing semicircle, and it's a little bit frustrating and disturbing. So I'm going to get rid of it in some way. Let's see, maybe if you take this point, or maybe we can change this color. Instead of pink, let's make it green. Alright, let's see how it looks now. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Alright, so that's it with the background. But one more thing, we also want to create some twist effect. So let's search for a turbulent displace effect. And let's change the displacement to twist. And also for the size, let's increase it to 300. And for the evolution, create a keyframe, press U, again, hold Alt and click on the stopwatch and write this expression again, time multiplied by 50. Let's see how it looks now. Yeah, I think it looks pretty good. And that's all for this background. Let's also toggle these effects down, just so we have a clean workspace. And now let's create a portrait, but for this we're going to use Photoshop. So let's open up Photoshop. If you don't have Photoshop, you can just mask out the portrait here in After Effects, but I'm going to use Photoshop because it's a lot faster. So I've imported this photo. This is downloaded from unsplash.com. I will leave a link in the description if you want to use this photo. So I'm going to choose select and then subject. And Photoshop is going to select for us the subject. And now let's click on this mask. Maybe we can increase the feather a little bit to about 2.2. Yeah, that's pretty good. Now let's save the photo. Make sure you save it as a PNG. Alright, let's switch back to After Effects now. Let's import the photo. Let's drag the photo here and scale it down. Actually, you only need the face, so I'm going to take the pen tool and I'm going to draw a rough path here. It doesn't have to be perfect. Alright, and press M for the mask and choose subtract. Also press F and let's increase the feather to about 10. Alright, something like this. Maybe you want to increase the size a little bit. That's pretty good. And now let's create some effects for this photo. So I'm going to search for a CC toner effect. And I'm going to choose duotone here. And for the highlights, I'm going to choose a dark gray. Something like this. And for the shadows, pure black, that's fine. Now let's add some curves. So for this, I'm going to take this middle point, drag it right here, something like this, and now just take this lower point and drag it to the right until you can't see his eyes anymore. Yeah, something like this. Now let's pre-compose this one. So right click and choose pre-compose, call it portrait. Select move all attributes into the new composition, press OK. And now let's create some shadows for this. So I'm going to search for the drop shadow effect. And instead of black, I'm going to choose this green. And I'm going to increase its opacity to about 60. Distance to 4. And softness 0, that's pretty fine. Now let's duplicate the drop shadow with Ctrl D. And we want the shadow to be in the other part. So I'm going to change its angle to about 220 degrees. And for the color, I'm going to choose this red. Let's choose this red again, because I accidentally moved the photo. Alright, now let's duplicate the shadow again. And we want it this time to be in the top part. So for this I'm going to increase the opacity to about 80, and the color it's going to be gray, and you'll see later why. And also I'm going to increase the distance to about 7, something like this. Before moving on, I just want to say that if you feel like you got some value out of this video or it has entertained you in any way, please consider giving it a like. Alright, let's now continue with the tutorial. Now we want to cut his head, so for that I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. Actually, yeah, a new adjustment layer, not a shape layer. Call it head. Let's move it under portrait, and with the pen tool, let's create a cut through his head. Hold shift to create a straight line. Alright, seems pretty good. Yeah, now let's search for a fill effect. And let's fill this with 50% gray. Make sure you uncheck this box. But before that, let's go inside the portrait composition and let's take the pen tool and again create a cut through his head. Press M and select subtract. For the feather, I'm going to choose 10 again. Now let's go back. Let's take the mask of the head layer and position it exactly to replace his head. Now let's create the eye. So for that, let's take the ellipse tool and let's drag an ellipse. Also, let's disable the effects for the portrait composition and for the photo inside the composition, just so we can follow the shape of the eye better. Now let's convert the ellipse path to Bezier path and start modifying its shape to resemble the eye. Also decrease the opacity a little bit, just so we can see what we're doing. Alright, maybe take the pen tool and create another point right here. Alright, it seems pretty good. Let's put the opacity again to 100. Now let's rename this one to left eye glow. And for the fill, I'm going to choose a nice red, so CB2802. Now let's search for the glow effect. And for the threshold, I'm going to increase it to about 83. For the radius, about 75. And for the intensity, about 3. Now let's take the glow and duplicate it with Ctrl D. So for the threshold, I'm going to decrease it to about 50. And for the radius to about 30. Also the intensity should be very weak, something like 0.3 should be fine. Now let's search for the Gaussian blur effect. And let's increase it to about 19. And one more effect, let's search for a turbulent displace effect. And for the amount, I'm going to choose 10. And for the size, I'm going to choose 80. Now for the evolution, you can see there is a little bit of animation. So click on the stopwatch, press U, hold Alt and click on the stopwatch again. And let's write time multiplied by 100. And now we have a little bit of animation on the eye. Also we can take the mode and put it to linear light. Yeah, something like this. Now let's duplicate this shape. Left eye glow 2, that's fine. And we can remove one glow effect because we only need one. Also for the fill, let's choose FFEF85. For the threshold, let's make it about 68. And for the radius, let's create a little bit of animation. So click on the stopwatch, press U. So for the first keyframe, this should be about 16. Now let's go about 30 frames, so 10, 20, 30. Let's increase it to about 48. Now let's go 50, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 frames and copy the first keyframe. Select all the keyframes, press F9. And now let's loop this animation with loop out ping pong effect. Yeah, and now we have a little bit of animation on the eye. Let's see how it looks. Also, let's enable the effects again on the portrait composition and also on the portrait photo. And this is how it looks for now. But for the eye glow 2, let's delete the turbulence displace effect and for the Gaussian blur I'm going to decrease it to about 13. Something like this, and now we have a little bit of animation and you can see the red surrounding the eye, which looks pretty interesting. Alright, now let's take these two layers and duplicate them with Ctrl D. Now right click, transform and flip them horizontally. Something like this. Alright, it looks pretty good for now. Now let's create the eye rainbow, so for that let's create a new composition and call it beam, and for the width I'm going to choose 500 and for the height 700. And now let's create a new adjustment layer and let's search for a beam effect. Also make sure you uncheck this box again. So starting point should be at the bottom and end point should be at the top. Now let's increase the length to about 75, actually 100, and also increase the thickness to about 90. Yeah, that's fine. Actually 90 it's too much. Let's decrease it to about 70 and 80 for the ending thickness. Now as for the colors, the default ones are good for now. Now I'm going to duplicate this layer a couple of times and change the position and the color of every beam, but I'm going to speed this up a little bit because it's the exact same procedure. Anyway, I'm going to leave the color I used on every beam so you can follow along much easier. Yep, something like this. Now let's go back to the comp one and let's drag the beam composition. Maybe we can scale it up just a little bit, something like this. Now let's choose a color offset effect for this. Again, create keyframes for all the colors, press U to reveal the property. Let's go 10, 20, 30, 40 frames and let's change the phase for every color. Let's go again 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 and change again the colors. Something like this. Now take all the keyframes, F9 to create an easy animation. Now hold Alt and let's loop this animation with the ping pong modifier. Copy the expression and paste it to the other layers, actually to the other colors. Alright. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Now let's take the curves effect and let's create a little bit of contrast, something like this. Now let's take the mode and choose the pin light mode. I think this one looks the best. Let's play around with the curves a little bit more, something like this. That's pretty good in my opinion. Maybe now we can change the color phase again a little bit. Alright, something like this. Now let's take the liquify effect and take this one. I really don't know how it's called, but let's take this one. You can increase the brush size by holding Ctrl and moving it with the left click. Alright, so let's create a little bit of distortion. Right, something like this. Now let's add the wave warp effect And for the width, I'm going to increase it to about 100. And the direction should be downward about 180 degrees. And also decrease the wave speed to about 0.5. And now if we play this, we can see we have a little bit of animation. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Also, you can create a mask and change its mode to subtract, then increase the feather to about 40. Yeah, this one looks pretty good. Alright. As I said, you can play around with the liquify or with the wave warp. Something like this. Now let's take the beam composition and duplicate it with Ctrl D. Let's make it flip horizontally. Choose the other eye. And we want to modify a little bit the colors. So for the first set of keyframes, let's make it like a blue one. For the second set of keyframes, let's make it to a green one. And for the last set of keyframes, let's say something like this mix of colors. Yeah, something like this. Let's see how it looks now. Alright, maybe we can modify the liquify distortion a little bit, because I think it's too overmuch. Let's see how it looks now. Yeah, pretty good. Now, let's take the portrait composition, duplicate it with Ctrl D. Alright, rename it to portrait glow left. And now let's search for a glow effect. Actually, first of all, let's delete the drop shadow effect. And now let's take the glow effect. And for the first color, let's make it red. And for the second one, let's make it pink. Now let's decrease the threshold, change the colors to A and B colors, increase the radius, something like this. Actually, instead of this one, let's choose a red one, something like this. Alright, now let's create a mask, because we want this effect to be only on the left part of the face. So take the ellipse tool and just drag an ellipse, something like this. Actually, better, let's take the rectangle tool. Yep, that's better. Press F and feather the mask to about 80. Maybe we can decrease the radius a little bit. Actually, increase it, the threshold, not the radius, sorry. And now we can modify the color phase. You can see how it changes its color. So we can create a keyframe. Now press U and again write the expression time multiplied by 100. Also, we can animate the A and B colors. So for example here, when the background changes its color, we can create another set of colors, something like this. But let's take the background and let's make the keyframes align with these ones. Now let's change again the colors, something like this, and also for the color B, something like this. Alright, and for the last set of keyframes, let's choose this blue and this yellow. And maybe we can animate the threshold and the radius also. So the threshold and the radius a little bit. Alright. Again, animate the radius and the threshold. It looks pretty gray. I want it to look more like a pink. So let's take the curves effect Actually, we don't need the RGB line, so let's take the red line and drag the middle point upper and a little bit to the left, something like this. Let's see how it looks now. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Let's also make them loop. So loop out and ping pong modifier. Copy the expression, paste it to the radius, and yep, that's all. And actually to the A and B colors. Alright, toggle this down, duplicate the composition, call it portrait glow right, press M, take the mask and move it to the other side. Disable the curves effect a little bit. So for this one, we want the colors to be, let's say, this green and yellow. For the second set of keyframes, we want another set of colors. And for the last set of keyframes, we want this blue with this yellow orange. Also, let's change the threshold, something like this. For the second set of keyframes, again, modify the threshold and the radius so it looks good. And for the first one, something like this. Now for the curves, let's make the red one on default by deleting that point, and let's modify the blue one. Let's see how it looks now. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Now let's move forward. Now let's take the beam composition, duplicate it, move it after the head layer. Now for this one, let's delete the liquify effect. Now take the head layer, duplicate it, move it above the beam layer. Now take the beam composition and here in the track matte panel just select alpha matte head 2. Now press R, rotate it to about -90 degrees, delete the mask, move it inside the head, also increase the size, something like this. And let's create a mask for this, so take the pen tool and create a shape around his head. Alright, now let's press M, subtract the mask, press F for the feather, about 30. Yeah, that looks pretty fine. Let's decrease the resolution because my computer can't handle all these layers and effects, so let's put it on half and let me render it a little bit. I don't like the wave warp, I think it's too pronounced, so I'm gonna get rid of it. Yep, that's better. And also for the mask, drag it a little bit lower. And for the feather, maybe 15. Yeah, that's better. Alright, we're almost done with this, so let's create a text layer for now. Mind your. And for the color, let's make it white, actually pure white. Move the text at the top. Decrease its size to about 125. Alright, and let's apply a choker animation, so simple choker, and let's create a keyframe, press U, let's go 30 frames, and let's increase the choke matte to about 10. Now let's go 40 frames, copy the first keyframe, press F9, and loop out the animation with the cycle effect. Also change this mode to overlay. Alright, now let's create another text. So let's write business. Increase its size a little bit. Something like this. Take the text and move it below the head. Now let's search for a directional blur effect. Change the direction to 180 degrees and increase the blur length to about 8. Something like this. Now let's create a new composition. Call it beam V2, 1080 by 1080. And here let's create again a new adjustment layer. Search for a beam effect, and for the starting point I'm going to move this point to the top, and for the end point to the bottom. Again, for the length 100, increase the starting thickness to 100, ending thickness to 100. Alright, now let's duplicate this one, make it blue. Actually, we can increase the thickness to 200, just so we can fill this composition faster. Now I'm going to speed up again the process because this tutorial it's already long enough. And we're pretty done, so let's go back to the comp 1, take the beam V2 composition and drag it above the business text layer. Let's search for a wave warp effect, make it sine, 45 for the height, 100 for the width, and 180 for the direction. Now take the set matte effect, and here select the business text, and also make sure you select here effects and masks. Now let's search for a liquify effect. Now before playing around with the liquify effect, you can disable the business text layer, but make sure you don't delete it because we used that in the set matte effect, if you remember. So what we have to do now is to take this first tool from the liquify effect, and I'm going to create keyframes for the mesh and also for the percentage. And I'm going to go all the way to the end, and here I'm going to paint over the letters I want to distort until I'm satisfied with the result. Before moving on, make sure the pinning is set to all edges. Alright, now let's create another keyframe for the percentage, and for the first keyframe make the percentage to 0, and for the last one to 100. You can also take the last keyframe for the distortion mesh and move it to the left if you want your liquify animation to begin quicker. Now take the keyframes for the distortion percentage, make them easy with F9, and also take this point curve and move it and drag it to the left. Let's see how it looks now. Yeah, it looks pretty good. I think the wave speed is too much, so I'm going to decrease this to about 0.3. Also the colors are not very blended together, so maybe I can change this by changing the mode to multiply or color burn, whatever. You can change it however you want. Alright, yeah, so now let's create the final composition and we're all done. So let's create the final composition, but before that the comp one should be called pre-final. Now take the final composition, insert the pre-final composition, create a new adjustment layer, search for noise effect, change it to squared, increase it to about 10, and animate the noise phase a little bit. Again, time multiplied by 500 this time to animate the noise, and let's also add some curves effect, and we're all done. Yeah, so let's create a little bit of contrast between the colors, something like this. And that's pretty much all. Let me just render it and let's see the final result. So that's it with this tutorial. If you managed to follow along until the end, give this video a like and stay tuned for the next videos. Bye!